as I was putting together the slides, I did all the important slides and forgot to put in my self-intro, so I'm going to just talk about it. So my name is Kiyoto, as introduced by James, and my day job is to run marketing for Treasure Data. So that's lead gen, positioning, sales enablement, all the good stuff. But today I'm really excited because I get to take a break from that and talk about something that I did prior to that I remain to be very passionate about, which is marketing open source projects, which I did as part of my actually day job before this at Treasure Data for FluentD. So can I get a quick show of hands? How many of you identify yourselves as like an open source enthusiast? You don't have to be a programmer. Good, I'm talking to the right audience. How many of you have strong opinions about marketing? Great. So hopefully those are positive opinions, but when I was a developer, and there was such a time, I was kind of skeptical about the value of marketing. So if you are a bit like my former self, hopefully this talk is going to be something that changes your perspective. So without further ado, I don't think I need to convince this audience about this fact that open source is just the way to do software today. I mean, there are platforms like these, and I actually started my career in finance, and this was like the most surprising thing since like the whole Lehman Brothers thing. Like Goldman Sachs is really paving the way for the investment banking world with how they approach open source. And also, like, when you think back like 5, 10 years ago, Silicon Valley software giants were not the most not the biggest open source enthusiasts themselves, right? Like Hadoop came about because Google releases research papers, but not the code behind it. And that is also changing, especially with this new wave of AI, deep learning, and machine learning. But with all these positive changes, most open source products never like take off. Like speaking about like the functional programming, I just remember that once I wrote a OCaml client for MongoDB. And I went back to that repo. And I think I had 18 stars, despite the fact that I haven't touched it for like 5 years. So why is this? Like, why do most projects fail? And I think it comes down to two things. One is lack of context, and the other is lack of distribution. So first about context, right? I've seen like some versions of this conversation many, many times, including in my work on FluentD, and including when my friends pitch their projects to me, and I'm listening, I'm like, so that's like configuration management. It's like, no, it's not configuration management. It's better than that. It's like, or isn't that just like a front-end framework? It's like, it's not a front-end framework. But the truth of the matter is most of us are busy, whether you're a developer or not. And most of us get exposed to a lot of software and a lot of new projects. And we just need to figure out a way to put things into the right bucket. And I call it like putting it into the right box. Most people have like very similarly sized, similarly laid out mental maps of which category a piece of software ought to belong to. And your job as someone who creates an awesome piece of open source software is to help your potential users put your project into the right box. But a lot of us developers don't think about it this way and really wonder why, like, say, Docker or Kubernetes have like 20,000 stars, whereas yours has 18, right? And it really just comes down to telling a story, putting it in context. But that's only like half the battle. The other half is once you figure out your story that resonates with your audience and that puts your thing in the right box, you need to figure out how to reach these people, which brings the problem of distribution. And this actually is the part where I actually learned a lot from good old traditional marketing, except you're marketing a very particular product to a very particular audience, which is you're marketing open source projects to developers. And you don't have to go any further than posting anything that is remotely marketing-ish on Hacker News, and just wait for 30 minutes, just keep refreshing, and you'll see what happens, right? Like, we're not used to this concept of marketing. So what qualifies me to talk about this, which is I did this as a day job. So I think it was back in 2014, our CTO came to me, and at the time I was a proverbial first employee at the start of doing all these things. And he's like, you know what? We should systematically market FluentD. I'm like, okay. And he's like, you should do it because you seem to have the most amount of time and you're not writing code. And I had zero experience in both marketing and definitely developer marketing. So when I went about doing a lot of things, got a lot of folks involved. So I somehow convinced Pivotal to let me give a talk at one of their local events. I don't know why they let me do it. But then, like, my colleagues are better, so he went all the way to Singapore and gave a talk at Red Dot Ruby. All of this actually culminated to me giving a talk at OSCON, where my machine didn't work. Pro tip, do not bring your Windows laptop to OSCON. They don't anticipate. Answered a lot of questions in the mailing list, like you're thinking that keeping the existing users happy, and like you're counting on the word of mouth. I even put together some ads, and again, pro tip, don't try to advertise your open source projects on Google AdWords. It doesn't work. But we tried a lot of things, but only a few things worked. But the few things that worked really, really worked, right? So as I was sort of thinking back, like the 2 years that I really focused on marketing FluentD, I was like, what's a common thread? And I found a pattern. And the pattern really is, and I'm a marketer, so I have to have like those, triangle-looking thing with like arrows in them. I'm just calling it open source marketing flywheel, but it really, really starts with, yeah, people are taking pictures. That's how I know I did it. It's like, but really, it starts with the users and the associated ecosystems, and really trying to learn what their pain is. And I'm going to introduce this concept of jobs to be done, but that's really, really the first thing that you ought to do after you do your awesome thing, and because you know that there's pain, right? Because without pain, you probably didn't create your software. But you have to figure that out and get the language right. Then from there, you need to focus on recipes and use cases, which actually creates solutions for related ecosystems, neighboring adjacent projects and such. And they will do all the marketing for you so that you can sit back and relax, refresh GitHub, and see all these stars like, soaring. So how does this relate to packaging? Because packaging is at the core of turning this flywheel. It's what greases the gears of making this whole thing work. And the rest of my talk, I'm going to talk about what I've done that have worked and my best educated guess as to why. So it comes down to three things. Focus on jobs to be done, mindful of languages and their related communities, and never forget cloud as a distribution channel. So package for the job to be done. Do remember this. I think this is the most important of the three. And if you're going to forget about everything else, remember this. And how many of you are familiar with the concept of the jobs to be done? About like a third of the room. OK. There's a second thing. After this talk, Google it and definitely read that book, When Coffee and Kale Compete. I know it's San Francisco. I don't know if Alan Clement is in San Francisco, but it's good marketing. He definitely understands the audience. So it's actually a very, very obvious idea in hindsight, which is you need to focus on both the functional and emotional pain of your user and make sure that your product not only does that job, but it communicates that it does that job well. So the developer example that I like to use, which I'm definitely a beneficiary of, is Heroku, right? I'm definitely aware of Amazon and all these cloud services. But what I love about Heroku is when I prototype an app or like landing pages, because I do marketing, I want to focus on the landing pages, copy, or how the app works, or how to like generate them in a way that's efficient. Not like I need to get engine X up, I need to maybe put the varnish cache, and I need to figure out how like Sinatra actually, like the whole Ruby packaging works. I kind of remember in theory, but I never get it straight in practice, right? And with Heroku, like I get to version 1 quicker. I can iterate on copy. I can iterate on what matters to my job. And so like really like the first lesson I learned is research what jobs need to get done and package your project for it. And again, this sounds very obvious, so let me tell a very specific story. So when I was told by our CTO that I was encoding and I had time, or I seemed to have had time, and I need to take this piece of middleware FluentD take off, like I kind of sat back and thought about it. It's like, it is a logging solution. It's an open source log management tool. Like even our target user doesn't exactly wake up every morning like delighted and like motivated to think about logging, right? It's something that they have to do to really use logs as strategic asset, as a way to understand how their infrastructure is working, all that stuff. But it's not really like, yeah, like I'm gonna totally hack on like my log management solutions today, and I'm gonna be a hero. It's not that. So I was like, what can I do to make it matter? So I started to talk to a lot of infrastructure engineers, and one of the things that I learned is Splunk is really popular, and most users really love it. They love the interface, they love the flexibility of querying, they love how like it's actually well packaged together. I mean, Splunk is worth billions of dollars for good reason. But whenever they're actually starting new projects or something that creates a lot of logs but not really sure about the business value of, they couldn't justify rolling out another Splunk box because it was just too expensive. So people were essentially looking for getting 80% of what Splunk offered, but without paying a dime. And for that, they were starting to look into the Elk stack, which, by the way, is another great example of packaging. I think they today call it Elasticsearch, but I'm still big fan of like the Elk stack. Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. And functionally, FluentD and Logstash, I thought, competed. So we did a lot of like, comparison and all these things, like what's the difference between FluentD and Logstash? But after I talked to a bunch of infrastructure engineers, the realization that I and my coworkers had was nobody was actually paying attention to FluentD or Logstash in isolation. They were thinking of either of them as a part of a bigger problem, which is I like Splunk, but I can't pay for it. What's the package solution around it? So we had this idea that maybe we can do EFK stack. So we're kind of like already behind because it doesn't roll off your tongue as well as the Elk. But you'd be surprised how effective this was. So I just did this search like yesterday. So, and it says like free alternative to Splunk. And Google thinks like we're so authoritative that like it's the instant answer, right? And here's a couple of things that I really want to highlight. First of all, it's actually not about open source. I know it's kind of sad, but it's about being free. It's about having a lower barrier of adoption. It's about being able to use it today and not waiting for procurement. And the other thing is context, right? It's kind of funny how like they highlight Elasticsearch and Kibana and not FluentD in the description. But I don't care. because this actually puts FluentD in context. This puts FluentD in the right box in the user's mind. And here's when I tried to put the quantitative hat. And I was actually looking at our data, and it really shows that this fueled the growth and accelerated the trajectory for us. So that's actually the number of GitHub stars cumulative for FluentD. And you can see when we put together that one page on our documentation site, and we spent $0 on AdWords. That's actually a lesson that I learned before I started to do this. It just took off because people were searching for how to do most of what they could do in Splunk, but with something that's free. And open source was the how. And there's actually another point to make about this, which is, I said this was just one page on documentation, which is documentation is your opportunity to package your software around the jobs to be done. And if you're not sure about how to do this, just go to DigitalOcean's website and look through their stuff. They have nailed this. I catch myself, and once in a blue moon, I try to spin up my own Linux server, which is not a good idea for me. And I always hit a snag, and I always search because I have this pain, which is, God, all I want is one box to test one thing, and I can't even seem to do it. DigitalOcean's page comes up because they figured out what people are searching for, and they tailor their documentation around it. And once I learned this, I started to collaborate very closely with them and co-publish 2-3 documentation pages together. And they've all been great, great sources of awareness and traffic for FluentD's main website. So there's a final point that I want to make about the jobs to be done, which is make your project obviously useful. And to do that, package it into something that's concrete. Because when you have something that's very obvious, I don't know what's a good example, but say it's a front-end framework. It's kind of obvious what it does. You can see it, right? But especially with infrastructure projects, it takes a lot of explaining for your value prop to surface. And one very, very recent example, I think, actually is Docker. It's very, very easy to forget now that when it first came out, not everyone was really getting it. I certainly didn't get it. To quote my CEO, who is an ex-Red Hat guy, he was like, how is this different from C group? I'm like, yeah, okay, maybe you're not the target audience. But as it started to take off, I think in early 2014, I had the fortune of meeting with Julien Barbier, who at the time was leading their community marketing. And I shamelessly asked, he's like, Julien, just tell me that one thing that you did that worked, because I'm sure that there's a secret. And he's a very nice person. He's like, there's no such thing. But one of the things that he said was, there's one piece of collateral that he wrote, that he shared on Hacker News, that really fueled initial growth. But not in the sense that it was a silver bullet, but it changed how he thought about marketing Docker. And it is this one janky Word document that he created. It's called Install and Run Memcached as a Service using Docker. And what he said was when Docker came out, ops were like, oh yeah, we totally get it. But the devs are like, okay, what is this? And what this 6-7 page Word document did was took something that was thought to be a very, very difficult and complex thing to make, which is Memcached as a service, right? Whenever something is a service, you feel like you need Silicon Valley venture money to start it. But if you follow the instructions, the 6-page instructions, not only did it show you how to do that using Docker, it also shows you how to actually set and get the key values from the Memcached from various languages. It's wow, it's almost like I managed to build a whole startup, but in 30 minutes, and definitely without creating a pitch deck. And this was like the start for them. And from this point on, instead of talking about like there's the containers and there's all these resource things, like, look, using Docker devs, you can create all these apps on your own. And the veracity of this claim is another matter to be discussed. But that definitely emotionally and to an extent functionally addresses the jobs to be done. So my second point is package for languages. And a quick show of hands, how many of you are familiar with a certain analyst firm programming language rankings? Okay, it's good that I'm not just being redundant here. So as you know, like Monk publishes, I think twice a year, the programming language survey with very detailed data and analysis. And it really matters, right? It puts your language in perspective. And the point that I want to make here is popularity is something to think about, but it's not everything. Like, you shouldn't do everything in Java just because Java is the most popular language. Like, if you don't know how to write Java, or worse yet, if you don't understand the dynamics of the community, it's not going to help. So choose whatever language you want. But do remember, the language choice you make is going to dictate how you should craft your distribution strategy. So advice or lesson is take advantage of the community behind your chosen language and follow the nose. And the example, again, is kind of self-serving, but how Fluentd got where it is. Today, it's part of GCP, like Microsoft packages into OMS. Atlassian is a big user. And we certainly didn't get there alone. Really, I was thinking about this last night, and it really started with this very, very nice gentleman. Do you guys know who this is? Yes, Yukihiro Matsumoto, the creator of Ruby. So he's always been passionate about getting Ruby's mind share beyond Rails, beyond web development. And for this reason, he's been a very early supporter and enthusiast for both Chef and Puppet, right? And when Fluentd came out, he was like, this is great. This is like Ruby is making progress on the infrastructure software market. So he really helped us get the initial mindshare up. And that led us to the Chef and Puppet community. And frankly, like in hindsight, this is a great thing, but we did this because we were a Chef shop and we wanted to deploy Fluentd more easily. So we packaged it for ourselves and just open sourced it. But that actually led somewhat accidentally to the DevOps community in general, and sort of directed our attention to that community. And Docker was starting to take off. And as a result, we became part of Kubernetes' logging pod. And that caught the attention of truly, truly big cloud infrastructure platforms. So what's a lesson to be learned here is that really knowing the language well is important. But just as important is really looking into your community around the language and see how you can leverage different people, different communities, different frameworks to make yourselves relevant and position and package your project for them. We created like the Chef package, and once we got to the Docker and Kubernetes ecosystem, we tried to understand how those frameworks and software worked so that we could be part of the conversation. And the same thing we've been doing with both Google and Microsoft. We just released a Windows installer for Fluentd, and that only took us 4 years. And my last point that I want to make is package for cloud. So again, I was thinking of like a way to like phrase this, and just like a very good marketing person, I have this tool called Google. And I was just Googling, and I was pretty tired, so I didn't even like, I was actually like, copy and paste, oh, this like, a great paragraph. And I was like, oh, I have to attribute it. I was like, oh, it turned out to be Stephen O'Grady. So The reason why you should care about cloud as an open source developer is that cloud is the natural and imminent successor of open source as a massive software distribution channel. And you can't avoid this, right? You're going to run into cloud both as a competitor and a collaborator. Because frankly, a lot of those services that are offered on cloud infrastructure providers are built on top of open source software and thereby their APIs. And you might ask, well, like, where do you start, right? Well, you have like 69 places, if I count it right, to start just on Amazon. And trust me, if you actually make it easier for Amazon customers to adopt any of their services or extend their ecosystems using your open source project, they'll do hell of a marketing for you. I have firsthand experience in this, and to end the presentation on a positive note, you gotta try. So I used a bit of my brain to guess the email address of the chief evangelist at AWS, Jeff Barr. It turned out to be jbarr@amazon.com. And I wrote an email saying like, hey, I have this awesome piece of logging middleware that can increase the ingress into your cloud, and your company is going to make a lot more money, but said it in a much nicer way. He actually replied, and I actually authored the very first guest blog on their AWS blog, and that led to a whole bunch of opportunities for collaboration. And a few years later, I was just like browsing one of those talks, and FluentD was mentioned as one of the ways to bring more data and centralized logs on Amazon. And when Amazon is doing marketing for you, that's a victory to be celebrated. So thank you very much.